Has the idea of reality bending and the uncertainty of what we truly see and know something that intrigues you? Characters who undergo tremendous stress from the similar facts of reality that we all must face? Hopelessness, jealousy, uncertainty? Well, I do. This idea only sprung to mind due to the fact that I saw both these shows in close proximity to one another, with a space of only a few months, and found many similarities between the two. Paranoia Agent was released in 2004, produced mainly by Madhouse and directed by Satoshi Kon. Chaos Head was released 4 years later, and once again produced by Madhouse and directed by Ishiyama Takaki. As you would expect in a show concerning people's mental well-being, both kick off with crimes that shock the public. In Paranoia Agent, Tsukiko Saki, a recently famous character designer, is clubbed one lonely night after receiving pressure from her workplace to make a new popular character. The attacker appears to be none other than an elementary schoolboy who rides around on golden skates to match his golden bat. Eventually, as time continues and the public start to become more aware of Little Slugger, or Shonen Bat, as he's called in the Japanese dub, he continues to appear to those who fall under a certain criteria, with the police struggling to piece everything together. Alternatively, in Chaos Head, a string of crimes dubbed as the New Gem Murders have caught a fascination with the public. Takumi Nishijo doesn't take much interest and would much rather prefer to stay at home, play video games, and fool around with his waifu. After receiving an email from an unknown source, he opens it up to find a picture of a man punctured to a wall with spikes bursting out all over his body. One day, after returning home from school, he witnesses just that. Shocked, he now has to question what's really going on and if he can be bothered to deal with it. In comparison, they both have a psychological mystery that takes up the main point and pulling factor for anyone interested, but both have different executions of pulling it off. Paranoia Agent has many different viewpoints and everything, from the victims to the police to gossiping housewives. I imagine that this is the case as Satoshi Kon said that this show is a compilation of ideas that didn't make it into his other movies. But throughout this, we get to see the effect that Little Slugger has had and the multitude of perspectives to see this from. However, this is for the best, as I can easily say that if it kept the structure that earlier episodes had shown, then Paranoia Agent would fall flat, just due to the repetition, as while these earlier episodes are unique due to the character situations, after seeing a few episodes you get quickly accustomed to the structure. These side stories and one-offs all help in building this world, and seeing as this and Chaos Head have similar ideas in reality, then this structure was for the best, as it manages to deliver a believable and fitting climax, while the other has different problems. Chaos Head has a much more common structure, with the action revolving around the protagonist. He learns new developments in the mystery, and so do we. There's nothing wrong with this approach, and the first few episodes really did draw me in. It's understandable as to why you'd be so afraid, and being thrown straight into the deep end on top of Takumi's hallucinations makes for an enjoyable and entertaining first few episodes. Speaking of hallucinations, I believe this to be an aspect that's unique and adds a lot. You've probably watched a horror movie where something really bad happens, then they're just like, oh no, it's okay, it was only a dream, or no, it's okay, I was only sneaking up on my best friend to say hello. The point I'm getting at is that in many forms, fake scares exist, and most of the time have little impact. In Chaos Head, we are presented with hallucinations. It helps to make the viewer question as to what's really happening, as sometimes they have impact, and in others they don't. It can be unpredictable, and was one of the reasons why my interest was grabbed. When Takumi is involved in one of his hallucinations, tension rises, as it could turn out any way, and the show takes advantage of this. The aforementioned problem that this show holds is with its attempts at believability with the faint line that reality holds. Without going into spoiler territory, Paranoia Agent has a well thought out and believable way of getting the viewer to take what's happening seriously, while Chaos Head does the same thing but there are big anime swords, which serve an obvious purpose which help in the downfall of this show. Which leads on to another major problem that this show holds. For the first few episodes, there is no real enemy. The show is capsulated in the mystery. Yet towards the first third, one does appear, and this transforms to just a bad action show. That's why there are swords with ridiculous powers, not because they have any reason apart from having poorly animated and choreographed fight scenes. On top of that, a bad guy is introduced. He's a generic bad guy that's evil because he can, and everything that's happened until that point is painfully explained to the viewer, and all ridiculously tied together. One of the main points that many people like about a mystery is the little hints that help a viewer make their own decisions. Yet this is all thrown out the window for some of the quickest and dumbest explanation I've seen. It makes so much of what has just happened seem worthless. It gives me the impression that while Paranoia Agent respects the intelligence of the viewer, you are given little snippets of information, and if you've been paying attention, you can figure it out before the show finishes. It doesn't patronize the viewer, and has a clear and well thought out conclusion. It also doesn't suffer from having a bland villain. The lines of morality are blurred. I believe this makes for a much more believable and enjoyable viewing. In real life, people aren't so basic when it comes to good and evil. There are so many inconsequential things about you that shape you as a person that just saying they're A or B can be insultingly simple. If you're going to tackle a difficult subject matter, that both of these shows do, being mature is one of the better ways of going about it and making the viewer satisfied. Paranoia Agent excels at this, as it takes its world realistically. It's clearly focused at what it wants to show, and throughout a mix of interesting situations and good writing, it achieves this, while Chaos Head has a decent beginning, loses its identity, and just becomes a pain to watch. However, we need good characters to accompany us while watching them slowly lose their grip on reality. Paranoia Agent has a much larger cast, and surprisingly enough manages to make the returning characters more developed than most of the mains in Chaos Head. One of the things I feel that Paranoia Agent succeeds in is its characters. There are a few cliches here and there, such as the detective duo, with one being older and more serious, and the other being a young rookie just learning the ropes. But most can't be put into such obvious categories. There are a large variety of people here, all with different problems, and the reason I feel that they're unique is due to their situations. These aren't ordinary circumstances that you find in anime, and the good writing offers a clear identity for some of these characters, while also giving them enough depth. While I feel that most of the characters are hits, some are misses. I understand that it must be hard to write for so many personalities, but I felt that it ended up with some characters completely outshining others, who happen to be quite boring. When it comes to Paranoia Agent, one of the important things to note is how the reality changes to the person focused, and just how appropriate and inventive the world reflects the personalities and troubles of these people. A good example would be the episode 3, Double Lips. The problem of the character is clearly represented to the viewer in a clever way that isn't directly addressed to us. Everything that we see is key to understanding this, as it all makes sense to the character in question. Satoshi Kon and Shishimi Nakami didn't just throw any weird, non-relevant motive to the wall hoping that it'd be good enough. Almost every bit of mise-en-scène, framing, and dialogue adds something to the characters, whether it's mentioned or not. It's all polished, and I think that's one of the best ways I can describe Paranoia Agent as a whole. Polished. It's all been clearly thought through. Sadly, the same can't be said for Takumi and his harem. He's a decent protagonist for the most part. When it comes to reluctant heroes, the main thing you expect is for them to eventually become brave and outspoken. I prefer that this was dragged out in Takumi's case, as it makes for a less predictable watch. However, his final resolution towards the end did leave a bit to be desired. I see what they're going for, but it just feels too rushed and not thought through. I feel that there's enough justification for him to act the way he does, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't somewhat invested in his character. Apart from Takumi, most of the other characters are pretty forgettable. There's this girl with glasses who gets some screen time, but she really doesn't develop, and the rest are stereotypes that you've seen countless times before. There's an annoying tsundere that's so one-note and wanting revenge I really couldn't care less. A girl who only speaks in painfully pretentious metaphors, trying to make you think that the story is more important than it actually is. An annoying little sister character, whatever this girl is, and Rimi, who has a bad mix of suspense and romance when dealing with Takumi. She's really the only other character of note, as she kind of has some importance, but is executed so badly due to the quite boring and basic interactions that she has with Takumi that I feel don't really offer the suspense that the show wanted. And finally, there's that bad guy who was previously mentioned, who has to be one of the worst villains I've ever encountered in a piece of fiction so far. On top of a terrible design, he's just so one-dimensional and generic. They try to flesh him out slightly in the last episode, giving him Gendo Ikari-like motivations, yet it's so obvious that this was added last minute to try and make him seem more complex than he actually is, and it has no previous mentions or hints beforehand. It's quite easy to say that Paranoia Agent has a stronger cast, even though some are hit or miss. They have more humanity and are just generally more well written than most of the cast for Chaos Head, with Takumi being the only exception. But how is this all portrayed? with animation of course. How do these shows differ? It's immediately obvious that Paranoia Agent boasts a very unique art style with realistic architecture and character designs that have a blend of realism and caricature about them. They typically look more Asian than most art styles, yet the variety is expanded to a large degree. I think it really works in the show's favour, as on top of being memorable, these designs are able to reflect a wide variety of emotion while still coming off as natural. The variety for each person's reality is something to be mentioned, as the types are all unique, and there are never moments where the quality sinks drastically. Though I didn't much care for the look of episode 5, I get that it's supposed to look like a generic JRPG, but that doesn't make it any more interesting. But all in all, the animation is really good. The exact opposite can be said for the other, however. The character designs for Chaos Head very much reflect the time period in which the show came out, with the wide eyes and the very little difference in facial structure between the men and women, with the greatest defining point being their hairstyle. The quality can sink at some points, which lead to awkward-looking frames if the angle is positioned wrongly. And as previously mentioned, the show tries to have action in the latter half, and it really doesn't have the budget for it. Speed lines are aplenty, and the choreography for the sword battles is some of the dullest I've ever seen. Even though they were both produced by the same animation studio, it's easy to see that Paranoia Agent had more care and attention. The sound was something that was easily contrasting as well. Paranoia Agent has a mix of more classical tracks that complemented the action on screen very well, evoking the emotion even more so. However, it wasn't just limited to one genre. There's a large variety that mixes genres mainly to match the central focus of that episode. In Chaos Head, I really couldn't remember any of the tracks, so I'll just let that speak for itself. What I could remember was the voice acting, which was fine. It did sound a bit generic, but I wasn't expecting much else, and I didn't feel that it dragged me out of it at any point. Apart from this woman, who feels so out of place.
Far from perfect.
Paranoia Agent did well in this aspect, with having a much more diverse range due to a large cast with a lot more believability. It also has Liam O'Brien in it, which is always a plus.
I've been waiting for this!
Overall, I think it's pretty obvious which show is more entertaining and manages to show a distortion of reality better. While it is kind of unfair to put these two side to side, I just wanted to try something new. The main reason I feel Paranoia Agent accomplishes this better than its contemporary is due to the grounded and better written characters, the thought out logistics of the world, and the good use of filmic techniques that help to deliver a fresh perspective on what is already a popular concept. I feel that Chaos Head could have been good if it had stuck with the tone and pace it establishes in the first few episodes, instead of derailing and turning into a bad shonen, without the budget or charm, while still trying to be too edgy to handle.
This is tougher than I expected.